Ever since we first got here, our archaeologists have been puzzling over this great hunk of masonry in the middle of our mill pond. What is it? How old is it? None of them seem to know. But Francis has just summoned me here in his usual state of Francis high excitement. What is it?
Well, actually, Tony, this is quite urgent. That isn't just a heap of rubble. There's structure there, and that structure is potentially very exciting.
It's now a race against time to get this metal processed and say whether it's from a blast furnace or not. Luckily, the cavalry's arrived to help Jerry out.
Joking aside, this is hard work.
It is.
I mean, being realistic, Jerry, we got an hour. Are we going to get a result, do you think?
We'll get as far as we can. I mean,
Yeah.
basically, what we'll do is, once we've got to this grit, we'll go and have a look at it under the microscope.
When we get it to the microscope, how do you distinguish between cast and wrought iron?
What we're hoping for is that we'll be in a sufficiently well-prepared state to see a certain microstructure. Now, what comes out of the charcoal blast furnace is a thing called grey cast iron, and that's got one characteristic feature, which are little flakes of graphite, and these should show at this level of preparation.
So it's fingers crossed, isn't it, mate?
Which is fingers crossed.
Yeah. Graphite flakes, graphite flakes, graphite flakes, graphite
Francis has gone mad.
flakes.
I don't even know what graphite flakes are. I just hope they find some.
Jerry, I can't wait, mate.
Well,
any graphite flakes? Graphite flakes, please.
Do you know what graphite flakes look like?
Show me.
Now, those are, I suspect, graphite flakes. I'm reasonably confident.
Great. So if you add that to the size and shape of the furnace lining and to that cast iron slag, then it really looks like we've got a blast furnace, doesn't it?
I would say for definite, quite honestly.
OK, well, that's fantastic.
It's superb.
I'm over
been
the
hard work.
moon. I am so over the moon.
Good. Well, take the message.
What a result. We've proved that before the pond was here, it was home to a blast furnace. It pushes iron-making on this site back to the 1650s, almost a century earlier than previously thought. We've only got about half an hour left, Francis. What do you reckon we've learnt from the trenches we've put in?
I could tell you in 2 hours. I mean, we have learnt so much. We got how people lived, how they worked. No, it's all there. And, of course, it all fits together. That's the great fun of this.
What is it about the Neolithic that gets you going?
I think it's a period when everything happened.
What do you mean?
Well, it's when we stopped being ancient and actually start being modern. In the Neolithic, human beings start taking control of their own world. You know, they control their supply of food, you know, their animals, the milk, meat, cereals, flour.
So where did the causewayed enclosures fit into that?
Well, I think the causewayed enclosures are about settling down in the landscape.
I suppose to build monuments like this in the landscape and transform the landscape does imply some kind of feeling of power.
Yes, but it's a very particular power. These sites are often about death, and death and the ancestors. The world of the ancestors obviously doesn't exist, but in their minds it did, and the ancestors were in league with something bigger and something more powerful. So by linking yourself to heroic figures in the past, you are linking yourself into God. Well, that's fantastic, Tony. We've actually got the original surface on which people would have walked around in the Neolithic.
This is this dark stuff here?
This is the dark stuff here. But you've got, look, you've got burnt bone here. You've got a large piece of bone here. You've got pieces of pottery there. It's intact. It's absolutely extraordinary. You know, people were walking here 6,000 years ago.
Is this in the ditch?
No. This is on a causeway. Now look, let me explain how it works. The ditch comes through to that drawing board there.
So the ditch is going this way?
It's going like that.
Yeah,
the ditch is going like that. It comes to a drawing board where it stops, OK? Then you have an undug bit, which is the causeway.
The causeway going in this direction?
It's going in that direction.
Yeah, yeah.
And then the ditch picks up again over there.
So now we have the basic structure of the monument. A ditch, then a causeway, and then another ditch. The word causeway is perhaps a little confusing, since it suggests a structure, but in fact all they are is the gaps between the ditches.
The other segment of ditch is over here.
And have we found anything here?
Yes. Same thing again, everything's preserved. There's been a lot of bonfires or something on the surface. You can see all this charcoal here, yeah, and sort of red fire-cracked silt.
How can you say for sure, though, that that's Neolithic and not Bronze Age or even later?
That could be Bronze Age. It wouldn't surprise me at all if they didn't use it in the Bronze Age. But we do know there are Neolithic people here because clever old Matt has found, let's have a look, about 10 minutes ago, that. You know what that is?
Is that an arrowhead?
Yeah, it is. It's a very distinctive leaf-shaped arrowhead. It's snapped across the middle, that's why it's got a flat end. And they're most commonly found in causewayed enclosures.
It's a beautiful find, isn't
It's
it?
absolutely cracking. It's so thin and beautifully made, that lovely ripple flaking on it. It's a lovely thing.
So at the very start of day 2, we've got our first Neolithic find. Leaf-shaped arrowheads were made from the very early Neolithic period at around 4000 BC. This one was either broken while being made or during hunting. It was found outside a ditch in Trench 2 and was most likely just thrown away. The all-important placed objects will be inside the ditches. And now that we've found them, Francis helps Matt mark out an area to dig.
We're digging the inside, that's right, yeah, so anything from the interior will be in this side of the ditch. I think it's going to be the best bit to dig.
This morning, Francis and Stuart started to look for the medieval shoreline in Bursledon. One of their targets was the remains of a storehouse near the old dried-up creek. Francis, I reckon this must be the most impressive rhubarb plant in England. Hope your archaeology is as exciting.
Well, actually it is, Tony. This is the storehouse. We've gone down and we've hit lots of rocks. And I think these are footings for walls or something like that. We don't know what date they are. But next door, right, dug a little hole and came up with this. Now that makes me very excited. It's a bit of pottery dated about 1450. So that is right on the money for the Grastia. And then we've also found in that trench a large-headed nail that could be something to do with ships, but we don't know for sure yet.
What does it tell us?
Well, what it tells us is what Bursledon is in the late 15th century. Bursledon seems to be, I think we're right in our original assumptions, between there and just beyond the main road which exists today. So that's the Bursledon of the 16th century with the creek out in front of it.
So if Stuart's right, this dried-up creek just by the church could have been at the heart of medieval Bursledon and the centre of a royal shipbuilding business which would grow and diversify for centuries to come, or at least until the railways came along. Stuart, I have to say, not everybody is yet convinced that there is an earlier mill here, but how are we going to prove whether or not he's right?
Well, what I plan to do is start a trench
some wood
down
on this,
there,
which is
across
exactly
the centre
what
of
will
the
make a
building,
bolt.
on
And
the
you can
floor,
see it, I think,
over the
quite
wall,
easily because
onto
this
the
is all
road,
sort of
end about
bubbled
here.
up here.
Hang on, how do you know there's a wall here and a road there? Have you just made that up?
Yes, with a bit of help from Stuart's map.
So if the map's right, then this is where the wall and the road would be.
You've got it.
Well, that makes sense, doesn't it?
Right, I think we're down at the right level here, Kerry. You can see it's good and clear.
Yeah,
So you see the change from the orange here to the clay.
it's very clear from up here.
Is it?
Yeah,
I think that's your buried Neolithic soil.
right.
Francis's trench on the east side and Phil's on the west side are both placed where we think the inner ring of the ditches is. If we look at these trenches in the context of the entire field, we can get our first real sense of how big the monument is. But it's not the only one discovered in this area. So this is our causewayed enclosure here, and there's another one here, and one here, and one here, and yet another one here. Yet these are very rare Neolithic phenomenon, and we've got 5 together. Why is that?
Well, I think it was deliberate. I think these are marking the edge, the boundary, of a really important cultural territory.
I think we've got what looks like the remains of a pot with some sort of burnt material in it.
Ooh. Yeah, it's like sort of wet digested biscuit.
Yeah, it's gone back to mud.
It can't go back to being mud unless it's very, very poorly fired.
Right.
Very poorly fired. But is it actually on the bottom of the ditch?
That's the bottom there. It's really hard.
Yeah.
So it's
yeah.
nearly there.
Oh yes, it's pretty well on the bottom, yeah. That's interesting. You've got a pot on the bottom of the ditch, near the centre. It's got charred grain in it. It doesn't look much now, but I reckon we're looking there at a deliberately placed offering.
Oh, right.
And that's very good news. Makes me very happy.
Good.
The offering pot turned mushy because it was only partly fired, perhaps in a bonfire. This fits the theory of the pot being used as part of a ritual. The pot maker saw no point in fully firing it, as they'd no intention of using it as a functional pot. But aren't we in a bit of a crisis? Apart from that spike, there's nothing in the middle of this geophysics that you'd want to shake a stick at.
No, I mean, that doesn't surprise me. You see, you're being a Western modern man. You see a circle, you see a target, you go for the bullseye. They weren't like that in Neolithic times. They were obsessed with boundaries. So this site is actually surrounded by not just one, but two great ditches around the outside. So it's double bounded. So I think the key to understanding this site lies in those double ditches around the outside.
So what do we do tomorrow?
Well, we dig them.
On the site of our Neolithic causewayed enclosure, we're working furiously away trying to find out what the Neolithic people were actually doing there. But Francis has brought me here to Woodwalton Fen to show me what the fens were like 6,000 years ago. Pretty bleak place for people to live.
Well, actually not, Tony. OK, come here in the winter and you get a bit damp. But you actually lived on the edge of the fen. I mean, they weren't stupid. They didn't like to live in water. You put your house on the dry land, OK? And then you had fields around you on the dry land, which are growing wheat and barley. But in the winter, when protein's getting a bit scarce, if you're living on the edge of the fen, it's great. Because you can come out here, you've got this stuff, you can feed as hay, it's just reed, but, you know, sheep love it. You can put this stuff on your roof as well to keep you nice and dry. It's much better thatched than from wheat or barley straw. I mean, we're standing on nice squidgy peat, OK? But you dry this stuff up, and it makes fantastic fuel. So this is a wonderful natural resource.
Was there anything to hunt?
Oh, huge amounts. That bit of water behind us would have been covered in ducks. There'd have been hundreds of duck on there. You also had geese. And then also, lurking in the depths in there, you'd have had sturgeon. So they probably ate caviar in the Neolithic. I think living here in the Neolithic would have been terrific.
In Phil's trench, the line of the outer ring of ditches is now strikingly clear in the soil. What are these for, Francis?
I think this is a miniature version of the larger ditch, the ring ditch that we've got in the middle of this enclosure. Now, and the reason I think that is that over here, we've got a causeway. So we've got one bit of ditch ending here, another bit of ditch ending there.
You say a causeway, but presumably not for people to come across, they just fall in.
Well, exactly. No, it's obviously ridiculous as a practical thing, yeah? But what I think these causeways are doing, and there are lots of them, I mean, there's more over there, is they're dividing this ditch deliberately into short lengths.
Why would you do that?
I think it's something to do with families. Look, Victor's drawn a picture. Let me show you. Now, this is the sort of thing that was happening. You see this chap here? Maybe he was the head of the family, yeah? And he's placing a pot, just like that pot, do you remember we found yesterday?
Yeah.
But a sort of half-fired thing. Now, it's a hopeless pot. Absolute disaster, but it was full of charred grain. It was obviously an offering. It's not a practical pot, just as that ditch isn't a practical ditch. It's representing something. And I think that charred pot, just like that skull behind, is representing a story in a family history.
So a bit like a cemetery where you not only bury people, but somehow you use them as an act of remembrance.
Yes, exactly like that. Absolutely.
So after all this archaeology, are you still convinced that essentially this is a big farm?
Well, look, we've got enhanced magnetism in the ditches here. This is burning. This is debris and charcoal from settlement being dumped into the top of ditches. On the interior of the enclosure, again, the anomaly is raised by the burning here, so it comes out as yellow. The phosphates, too, show that we've got animals being driven into the enclosure, pulled outside and then driven in. So, you know, I think it's pretty compelling.
Compelling?
Superficially, yes, but the burning on the interior would fit beautifully with people using this seasonally, clearing off the vegetation and then getting on with their religious activities.
It does stretch credibility somewhat, doesn't it, to think that this huge earth monument with these massive ditches around it was built simply to be a farm.
Well, not a farm, but a place where resources are pulled into. They dominated a wide area of this landscape. They are farming it, and they're bringing the resources back here. I just don't think you let your cows into church, do you? And you don't let them poo in church when they're there.
That's a point, isn't it? Aren't you simply importing a theory which works well in other sites where they have found ritual deposits and sticking it here where they haven't found any?
Well, I'd contest the fact they haven't found any. We've got that half-fired pot, which doesn't make any sense, full of charred grain right in the bottom of the ditch, and that aurochs bone, which is placed absolutely on the bottom of the ditch, right in the middle. And that thing is a deliberate placement.
So are you prepared to concede that there might be a ritual element here?
Well, look, I think in everyday life there's an element of ritual that creeps in, and I think we can pick that up through archaeology. So I'm prepared to concede that they were doing things that were not wholly practical all of the time.
And are you prepared to concede that there was probably some farming going on here?
Of course. And I think what really worries me, Tony,
Yeah.
I think if we continue this discussion for another 2 or 3 minutes, we might end up agreeing. So I think we should stop.
No, let's stop now. Cut.
We've got a huge Roman town, Dura Breve, the fortress of the bridges, an industrial suburb on the Nene Valley. We've got one of the major pottery production centres of Roman Britain running down the Nene Valley. So it's pretty much in the centre of things in the Roman world. And then you've got the Fens out to the east.
And what impact would the Fens have had?
Well, huge. I mean, they would have been extremely wet for a start. Basically, in the summer, it would have been very lush grazing. But the most important thing, I think, from the Romans in this part of the world's point of view, is that the Finland waterways, and they had canals, we're pretty sure of that, and rivers, were an important means of distributing heavy things. And the obvious heavy thing is pottery.
I've also just found out that Stilton cheese isn't made in Stilton.
In the 18th century, the landlord of the Bell Inn in Stilton, his relatives invented Stilton cheese in Leicestershire, and they sold it at the Bell Inn to people going up and down the Great North Road. So that's why it became famous in the length and breadth of the land, because it was such a cracking good blue cheese, and it's still made to this day in Leicestershire, Nottinghamshire and Derbyshire.
With so much happening on this site, Stuart's role in understanding how it fits into the landscape could be crucial, as this area would have looked very different 2,000 years ago.
In the Roman period, we're looking at all this area being the bog right up to the Ermine Street there, along up to that ridge up there, are we, where the church spire is?
That's right. Well, I mean, people say that the Fens are flat. They're not, especially on the edge. Lots of hills.
If you can see that, if you come down here, you can see that really clearly where the burials and kilns have been found. I mean, what's interesting when you get down here, can you see the ridge where the burials and so on, how it rises up? It's actually on a piece of high ground amongst this fenland, isn't it? It's standing proud of the land surface. This must have been dry during the Roman period.
Oh, it would have been, yeah, Roman and Saxon period. But of course, the other thing to bear in mind is that we're standing on flood clay. If we'd been back in Roman times, we'd be at least a metre lower down, so those islands would be even more in relief.
But if you look here, I mean, this is industrial scale archaeology. We haven't got down onto anything yet, have we?
Haven't we? Oh, yes, we have. You see that dark layer turning up there?
Yeah.
That's the Roman level. And I'm so excited because I was worried. I thought it could have been removed by the water that laid down the flood clay, but it hasn't.
So what is this stuff that we're looking at?
Well, that mass of clay above the digger bucket, that was laid down at very thin layers, like sort of 1 millimetre a year, over the best part of 1,000 years. And it's flood clay that's come in from the River Nene. And so it's actually buried the Roman surface intact underneath it.
So actually, the quality of the archaeology might be even better than what we've been finding over there.
Oh, much, much better, because there's a good chance it'll even be quite wet.
Kerry! Come over here, mate. So what are you seeing on that level?
What we've got is a much earlier Roman surface, at least 1.5, 2 metres below. And it's absolutely stuffed full of pottery.
Wow.
And that's from one sweep of the bucket.
And that hasn't been broken by the bucket?
No, that's all breaks. You can see the dirt on the sides there.
Francis, can you see it's got all this shelly stuff in it?
Yeah, they used to add shell. It made the pottery dry better when they were making it.
Oh, crikey, look at that lot.
You can see the amount of pot we've got
Yeah.
crammed into the centre there.
So, I mean, this is presumably occupation years.
Oh yeah, I think it's occupation with knobs on. I suspect. I mean, that much pottery,
Yeah.
and some of it's very fresh. Could be a kiln as well. I mean, and settlement. We know it's settlement because you've got bits of lunch.
Oh yes, you've actually got the cut marks on the bones. So somebody's at least eating down here, aren't they?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Crikey. But there's a heck of a lot of pot, isn't there?
Yeah, and I mean, the other thing about it, not only is there a lot of pot, but you can see the dark colour of the soil. There's a lot of charcoal in there, and of course there's waterlogged wood in there. Not a lot, but it's there.
I think that's quite incredible. I mean, it must mean there's a whole lot of stuff under this field, mustn't it? Extraordinary.
To me, that is prehistoric.
Yeah.
To Francis,
It's heaven.
What do you think it is then, Francis?
Well, if you look very closely there, you can see that the 3 dark marks, that's a clue. This is a ditch that isn't dug in a continuous length, but in segments.
Right.
And it's a causewayed enclosure. So with ditch segments separated by causeways. And if it is what we think it is, it's going to be about 3,500 BC.
And he's dug them, he knows about them in this area. Yes, sir.
So we've got 4,000 years worth of activity.
if that's prehistoric, you can forget your classic kiln anomalies.
Why?
Well, this is far more important.
Oh, so you're prepared to accept that there wasn't a kiln there, but it doesn't matter anymore. Day 3 here in Stilton in Cambridgeshire, and this is the trench that everyone's getting really excited about. Yesterday they were speculating that in it is a Neolithic causewayed enclosure, which is very, very rare. Francis has only ever discovered one in his life. Francis, now you've had a look at it, is this the second?
Well, I'm very excited, Tony. First thing this morning, we found this superb Neolithic flint. It's beautifully sharp, and you know, I'm very excited about it. Well, I was for about 10 minutes, and then we found this. And this is a piece of Anglo-Saxon pottery.
That's just as exciting.
Hang on, what are you saying? Are you saying it is a Neolithic ditch that's been reused in Anglo-Saxon times, or are you saying it's not Neolithic at all?
I'm saying, if it was Neolithic and reused, I'd expect a great deal more flint than this. I think it's Anglo-Saxon, end of story.
If we're right, and it is this vast prehistoric ceremonial landscape, what does it mean? What's it for?
Well, what it was for was the different things in people's lives that they want made formal and ceremonial. So these cairns would be when someone passes on to the next world. This double stone row could be a procession that marked when a new chief came to power, something like that. This stone circle was where people celebrated the changing of the seasons.
So it's like a combination of a church and a registry office.
And a town hall. Yes, it's all there. And the thing is, it all seems to fit together, Tony.
It's almost too good to be true, isn't it?
It is. And then I sort
Of course, all these theories rely on the dates of these monuments tying together.
that whole, what, was a stone in there once?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really nice, Robert. It's been pulled out, presumably when the reservoir's been done.
Yeah, it looks about that level. So then over here, we've got another stone, the one that matched that. Oh, yes. I mean, I think we've got the hole, haven't we, for the stone?
It looks like it. I mean, you can see that small rock standing down there.
That's the classic wedging for a stone in a stone row. And the other thing, of course, we got this stony stuff at the top here. Do you think that could be the remains of a sort of walkway?
It's degraded down and it's covering the surface. So this must have been at the point at which this was open to walk up and down on, I would have thought.
I think that's brilliant. OK, I'm convinced, especially with that little packing stone there, that this is a prehistoric double stone row.
Yeah.
I mean, little doubt about it.
So Francis is very happy with his double stone row. But other parts of the site have got us scratching our heads.
Could have easily been set up,
Okay.
which could have fallen over.
We've got another massive monument to investigate, and Helen and Stuart are getting their heads round it.
Stone doesn't mean it's part of a circle.
Yeah.
So what I'd like to see now would be the results of the geophysics and see if we get a better pattern.
So a lot's riding on geophys to prove that the stones are in a circle. Beginning of day 3 here at Totterford Reservoir in Devon, and everyone's a bit muted today after last night's celebrations, which is a bit of a problem because we've got an enormous amount of work to do trying to establish whether or not what we've got here is a giant prehistoric stone circle. Francis, yesterday afternoon we put this trench in to try and establish whether this stone had been buried a long time ago or whether it was much more recent. Have we proved anything yet?
Yes, Tony, and I am certainly not muted on this. This really is exciting. We've got the hole that the stone was placed in, right, but more than that, we've got the stones that were put in there deliberately to wedge it, to get it at precisely the right angle. So you wouldn't do that if you were just making a field boundary wall or something. So this has to be a Bronze Age stone. Now, whether it's part of a row or a circle, I don't know.
I've seen some flints from around this stone. Those flints are definitely prehistoric. I am also convinced that that stone is prehistoric.
But of course, just because we've got one prehistoric stone doesn't mean we've got a prehistoric stone circle, does it? It just means we've got one prehistoric stone.
Exactly, Tony. But look, over there, you see that stone there standing on its own?
Yeah.
Well, Geophys discovered a stone hole next door to it. So if we put a trench between those two, and they're both real and they're both prehistoric, then I think we've got ourselves a stone circle. We're in the middle of a Bronze Age stone circle.
Yeah.
We've got a post hole, and these flints are all Mesolithic.
So how long before the Bronze Age circle was here would that post have been here?
About 4,000 years.
Wow. And that's the same sort of date as the mound up there?
Yeah.
That's extraordinary. So 4,000 years after that post was put in, all these stones were erected. So you were right yesterday afternoon when you said if we could crack this circle, then we would understand more about the logic of this site. You've got something that's Mesolithic here, and that's Mesolithic, isn't it, on that mound?
Yep.
And then later you've got the walkway coming up to it, and then you've got the Bronze Age circle.
Yes. So this site began when people were still hunter-gatherers, then it became farmers, and then it was an age of metal.
Phew, at last. That's a relief, isn't it?
I know.
Out on site, the chaos continues. Francis, this is madness. You closed that trench down this morning because it's raining so much, but you're stuck in another one.
Well, the thing is, Tony, we can't just stop. We've only got 3 days, and I'm not having people digging these trenches. It's just being done by a machine, so there's no health and safety problems. I actually extended that other trench over there because there's a flat bit behind the bank, and that's where normally you'd expect to find houses. We didn't find any, so I then came over here, but this is another flat area. You can see we're in a natural hollow, and this again is where you'd expect to have houses, because you're protected from the winds blowing over there.
And have you found anything?
Nothing. Absolutely not a sausage.
So are you going to keep on digging more trenches, or are you going to stop and think now?
I'm going to stop and think and have a bath, I think.
It's the end of day 2. We've dug here, here and here, but we've failed to find any evidence of people living on this hill. And yet we've got 2 giant earthworks. This place is still a total enigma. So despite the rain, we've hit 2 magnificent ditches, Matt's and Phil's. But of course, we still don't know whether or not they're linked, but you think they are.
I do, Tony. I mean, they're so similar, both the ditches. I mean, the filling's similar, and the sizes and the depths, so I think they are the same.
You're shaking your head, Stuart.
Yeah, I disagree with that. I think we've got 2 distinctly separate monuments. One that goes right the way across the ridge, one we've got here, but over in the field where Matt is, I think we've got good evidence that it's a distinctly separate monument.
What fascinates me about this ditch, though, is the amount of work that must have gone into it. How many people do you think it would have taken to build the whole thing?
Oh, a lot of people, Tony. Hundreds, maybe even thousands.
So why are there no signs of life at all on the entire site?
Well, that's a good question, Tony, but we've just discovered that here there was a probable entranceway into the interior of the hill fort. Now, we know from other hill forts that just inside the entranceway, and that would put us over there, in the other field, that's where you have most of the buildings and most of the evidence for people. So I think tomorrow morning, that's where we start digging first thing.
Just starting to rain again. Pretty muddy, pretty sticky, but pretty good 3 days.
Oh, fantastic 3 days, Tony. I mean, we thought we had a scatter of Roman coins and a few ditches, you know, farms did something like that. And we've been able to shove the site back 500 years to the early Iron Age, when it was an important site then, and it became even more important in the late Iron Age, it really has been a revelation of just what lies hidden under the soil here.
Now look, hang on, I just knew Francis would turn it into a prehistoric site, but he's missing the fact that we've also, for the first time, got a glimpse at a new type of Roman site. I think Wickenby has turned out to be a little microcosm of what perhaps most of rural Roman Britain was. It's a new type of site that metal detectorists are finding now. We're recording it. We barely understand the archaeology yet. We're just at the beginning of the story, and it may take decades of excavations of places like this before we really understand them.
At the beginning of day one, these two were both fighting their corners passionately. You wanted it to be Iron Age. You were desperate that it should be Roman. It doesn't matter, guys. We got both. 1,000 years of British archaeology in 3 days. Not bad.